have a lot of free time compared to most periods of history, but we don't generally use it the way Aristotle thought we should for perfecting our physical and mental abilities. It's mostly watching television that is taking up, that's the single largest source of information that we process during free time. So this is kind of the background that gives you a sense for what the quality of life really entails. It entails using these opportunities to process information in ways that will make our life better in the present and make it more likely to be more enjoyable, more exciting in the future. In other words, to invest attention, which is the attention is the gate through which information comes into the mind, to invest attention in ways that increase the likelihood of having a life which is desirable, which you want to do, which you enjoy for its own sake. So I started studying essentially this set of questions by first looking at creative individuals, because I thought that creative artists, scientists, athletes are living in a way that seems to optimize this ability to process information. That is, they do things that they like to do, they do things that they think are important, they enjoy the moment as they do it, and usually also the consequences of it. So I thought that a creative group of people would help to exemplify what is the best strategy for living, in many ways, a good life. And I talked about creativity yesterday, so I won't talk about it now, but I will talk about this common experience of creative individuals that yesterday I already showed this particular slide, so I won't go too much in detail here. This is from a composer of music interviewed 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, and he's describing how the composition of music produces an ecstatic state which is so intense that you feel almost as if you don't exist when you do it, because he's processing probably at least 120 bits of information per second, just trying to imagine how to create a good piece of music, something that didn't exist before, but he wants desperately to capture in his notes that he puts on paper. So he is so involved in putting those notes down that he's not aware that he's tired, that he may be, he has responsibilities, that this perhaps in a couple hours that he should be worrying about his income tax or whatever. He's completely, all of his attentional capacity is taken up by the production of the score that he's trying to write. I could spend the rest of the hour talking about just trying to parse this one little quote from a long interview, but here is another one, a poet who was interviewed by a former student of mine who wrote a book called Writing in Flow, and she interviewed some leading writers and poets, and it describes this moment when the poet essentially enters the state of ecstasy that comes when you move from the reality of everyday life, where you feel forced to do the kind of things that everybody else does or that you should be doing, and you, through making words, come out with a new meaning, with a new form, in a beautiful way. You feel that you have entered a new reality. You have passed from one type of, from one world of experience into a new world. And this poet describes it, as you see, as an attempt to open a door that floats in the sky, and you're floating next to it, and you're trying to grab and open the door and enter this new world where your words are creating a more harmonious kind of reality. But it's not something you can force. You are being pulled by the gravity of everyday life concerns. You're trying to avoid temporarily that pull of gravity and enter into this world that you are trying to make to come about. Now, this sounds perhaps too poetic to some of us, but it's very similar actually to what Einstein, when he described how his ideas for the theory of relativity in physics came about, he used almost the same images of being in the sky, floating and seeing these shapes trying to get together and form almost like puzzle pieces fitting. And he was trying to put them together, but he couldn't, and there was this force of the old way of thinking pulling him back. So it's not a kind of romantic description. This is fairly accurate as to how it feels when you are ready to enter this state. But it doesn't happen only in the arts. For instance, athletes, I mentioned, experience it too. And this is from a psychologist in Australia, Susan Jackson, who interviewed some of the leading athletes, Olympic athletes, and especially figure skaters, which is her sport. And when you read this description, you see some of the same elements that the poet and the musician mentions, namely that it seems to be almost spontaneous, automatic. You don't have to think. You are an automatic pilot. You don't have thoughts extraneous to what you're trying to accomplish. You don't even realize that the music is something that comes from outside. You feel like the music is inside you. You are inside the music. It's again a condensation of experience that comes from being so attentive to what you're doing. In this case, the very difficult physical movement. You have to pay so much attention to that you hear somehow the music, but you're not thinking of it as music. It's just you pay enough attention to move with it, but it's not. You don't say, "Oh, here I'm skating to the music." You're too involved to think of you as separate from what you're doing. So this is very typical. Now, we were interested in what conditions make this kind of experience possible. And, well, first of all, the experience is defined essentially by this heightened concentration. People, when they're really focused, concentrated, that's a prerequisite. And that's the way you can tell whether somebody's in flow. You can be in flow you can concentrate for other reasons too. For instance, if you're trying to escape from a raging bull or something, you concentrate on what's happening. But so it's not the only thing. It's not sufficient to be in flow, but it's certainly a necessary condition. When the concentration reaches a certain depth, then you step outside this ordinary reality in which we live most of the time, and you experience the world in a somewhat different way, sometimes completely differently. And that's why the word ecstasy, which in Greek meant to stand to the side of something, you feel like you're standing to the side of the kind of life that you usually lead, and you have a new life. Now, this happens usually when the things to do are quite clear. You have very clear goals. For instance, games and artistic activities have this advantage of giving you very clear goals. Imagine, you're playing tennis, every second where you want the ball to go, and you get feedback, which is very important. You know whether you are doing things right or not. So a tennis player is constantly able to check whether their intentions match their behavior and the response they get from the other people. A musician can play, let's say, an instrument, a violin, knows what notes they want to play the next moment, and they can hear whether the note is the kind of one that they want to produce. So that kind of feedback, clarity of goals and feedback are kind of essential. And then the other condition is that one should feel that what they can do is more or less enough to cope with the opportunities or challenges of the situation. Because if your skills are too low to what you have to do, you start feeling anxious. And if your skills are too high to what you have to do, the challenges are trivial, you feel bored, you start feeling bored. So that is a very important condition. When these first four things are in place, then you start forgetting yourself. You feel that you are at one with what you're doing. So the boundaries between myself and my activity disappear. And you are in a kind of blissful, selfless state, which is also, of course, the goal of many Eastern religious traditions, yoga and Zen and so forth. But it happens to everyone in every culture naturally when they are disinvolved in what they're doing. The interesting thing is we find that after people experience flow, though, their self-esteem goes up and stays up for quite a long time. In other words, there's this paradox that you have to forget yourself in order to increase the value that you put on yourself. And there are many variations of this, of people feeling at one with the team they're playing in, feeling at one with the music, feeling at one with the logic. When they play chess players tend to feel that as they play chess, they are not anymore kind of human beings with all their limitations. They are part of a kind of universal logic that rules the world, and they feel this almost omnipotent feeling. I'm pure reason now when I play. It's an interesting way in which you transcend your identity and lose yourself in this activity, and then you come back feeling stronger. In almost every case, people lose sense of time, and generally time seems to go very fast, but occasionally a very short period where you have to intensely experience it seems to stretch out. For instance, figure skaters, when they do those very difficult triple Lutzes and stuff, they feel that that fraction of a second lasts for minutes because they are registering, condensing so much information, kinesthetic, visual, auditory information, that it seems to stretch out. So the real bottom line here is that time is no longer just always the same, 60 seconds to a minute, etc. Experientially, time begins to become very flexible and it adapts, the sense of time adapts to what you're doing rather than the other way around.